since 1871 to present. So specifically today we are going to look at scramble for and partition of African territories. The word scramble for refers to the rush by different European powers, then partitioning, this is the division. So this is the time when African territories were fought for and then divided by different European powers, just like a piece of cake. So European powers looked at African territories just like a mere piece of cake. They came and they fought for them, and later they divided them amongst themselves. Some of the African territories that were divided by the European powers in the struggle for territories, we have Uganda, we have Kenya, we have Zanzibar, we have Tanganyika, and many others. Tanganyika was taken by German, and then Uganda plus Kenya and Zanzibar were taken by Great Britain. So we are going to see the reasons to why these countries rushed for and then divided the African territories amongst themselves. We have what we call the economic factors that pushed many of the European powers to come and fight for African territories. Then we have the social factors still that made the European powers to struggle for African territories. And then we have the economic factors. Specifically, these European powers came for African territories because of the economic factors, and still we had what we call the strategic factors, that is in terms of position. Some of the African territories were positioned. When you talk about position, they were positioned in the areas that were easy for them to penetrate, and these areas at the same time were gifted with minerals, so it made them to rush. So let us look at the factors or reasons that made the European powers to rush for African territories. One, the need for raw materials. This is one of the factors that made many of the European powers to rush for African territories. So most European powers or nations wanted to control areas that had cheap raw materials to feed their hungry industries at home. So some of the European countries were looking for raw materials that they could feed their home industries. So the only areas that they saw that may be approachable in terms of minerals, it was in East Africa. So they rushed for East African territories, hoping that in these areas they will find cheap and very cheap raw materials that they can use to feed their home industry. So that is one of the factors that made them to rush for East African territories. Two, there was need to secure a profitable market overseas for the European goods which had flooded in European markets. So time came after the outbreak of Industrial Revolution in Europe that started with Britain. Many of the European countries faced a problem of overproduction. So due to overproduction, now they had a limited market. Goods, they used to produce more than what they could consume. So after producing more than what they could consume, they had to look for areas where they can supply together these flooded commodities, and they had nothing else apart from coming to Africa, whereby Africans were green about the European goods. So Africans were highly demanding for them, and yet this is the time when they are also looking for areas where they could supply the flooded goods. So this was now a blessing with these guys to them to come and supply those goods to African territories. So they rushed to secure profitable markets for those flooded goods. So third, there was need to secure areas where surplus capital would be invested. So the Industrial Revolution that had generated a lot of wealth for European powers who wanted to set up now plantations and exploit minerals made them to come to East Africa, where they thought, now we are now rich enough, we can now go and exploit African minerals. So after these people facing a challenge of Industrial Revolution, they had generated a lot of wealth, and time came and the money to them, it was now useless. They had now to invest this money in other areas. So they saw no any other areas apart from East African continent or East African territories. So this made them to rush for African territories such that they can easily secure their surplus capital. So there was needed to resettle the useless population. Let me say like that. After the outbreak or after the rise or after the outbreak of Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution, this is now the period when machines had been introduced in Europe. So after machines being introduced in Europe, that means human labor became useless. And remember, during the period of slave trade, many people were taken in that process of slave trade. So time came and these people became redundant. So after them becoming redundant or useless in terms of labor, they had to look for the ways of now removing this redundant labor and take them back. They did what they call deportation. So they had to deport these people that they had taken during slave trade to actually back to their countries. One of the African countries that was set for ex-slave people, it is Liberia. Liberia is one of the countries that was made up of slaves. And still we have Ethiopia, where we had still the slaves. We have Sierra Leone, that is in West Africa, whereby slaves were brought back, but these were called the Creoles in West Africa. So all these people were once slaves in Europe, but time came and they became redundant, and so European countries rushed for African territories to make sure that they resettle them. And one of the countries that was the champion in this, it is America, United States of America, which was so influential in the process of resettling these people. And it is one of the European countries that was so influential in the establishment of Liberia as a state or as a country for freed slaves. So after taking them to Liberia, they gave them even security, and they used to actually keep their eyes on such countries so that they don't face the same problem. This is the time when they set out to campaign for the ending of slave trade in Europe. So the strategic importance also made many of the European powers to rush for African territories. For example, look at River Nile. River Nile, after Britain and France occupying Egypt, Britain realized that Egyptians could only survive on the waters of the Nile. So for them to secure the position of the Egyptians, they had also to go and see where the source of the Nile is, such that there is not any other European country takes over that country. Because of the terms of the Bahraini Conference. The terms of the Bahraini Conference stated that if one of the European powers takes a territory, therefore no any other European country is allowed to go in that area. If you find your friend when he has already hosted a flag there, you easily march out. So Britain was afraid that if the source of the Nile is in a particular country and one of the European countries takes that area, it means Egypt was off. So Britain had to rush and make what we call exploration. So Britain had to employ a number of explorers, the John Speke, to come and see where the source of Nile is. Are we together? The James Grant. So these people came in Africa. They came in Uganda to look for the source of the Nile. So when they discovered that the source of the Nile is in Uganda, so Britain came and signed the Heligoland and Hamerton Treaty, whereby it confirmed Uganda as a country under British protectorate. So another one, King Leopold II's activity in Congo. Leopold II represented Belgium. And this man, when he went in Congo, he secured the Congo for Belgium. This man was able to explore Congo, and he found out that Congo was gifted with minerals. Congo is one of the African countries in East Africa here that is gifted with gold. So Belgium secured that area. So after Belgium securing that area, other European countries thought that the entire East Africa is having such minerals. So they rushed for them so that each gets that area, so that each country gets that area that they surround, thinking that all these areas are gifted with such minerals. Actually, when Britain took over Uganda, they didn't think that even Uganda is having fuel, because we have just discovered fuel recently. So Britain thought for actually the Only thing that Britain had interest in Uganda is to secure the source of the Nile. Because first of all, Uganda is a country that is landlocked without a seaport. So they didn't have a lot of interest in it, but majorly to secure the position of the Nile. But time came. Now we've just discovered fuel. That's now you are seeing many European countries now changing their attention to Uganda. After Uganda finding the fuel, we are seeing China, United States of America, France, many others. So we have the mineral discovery in South Africa also made these European countries to think that the entire Africa is covered up with minerals. If we talk about mineral discovery, we shall look at a man called Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was one of the British explorers that explored the South Africa. This man, he went at Kimberley, Witwatersrand, and he discovered diamond and the gold, and at the same time manganese. These are things that were highly demanded in Britain. So with the reports that Cecil Rhodes gave to the British government, and at the same time the maps he drew. Remember, Cecil Rhodes said, "I want to see the entire Africa being painted red." That is a map that was representing Britain. So Cecil Rhodes, the reports he gave to the home government, it scared other European countries because they saw that Britain was expanding at a higher speed. So they rushed thinking that East Africa is having such minerals, just like the minerals Cecil Rhodes found in South Africa. If you look at Drakensberg Mountain in South Africa, the Zulus were protecting that mountain because the mountain had, first of all, fertile soils, and at the same time around it there were minerals. So this even caused the crash between the British and the Zulu. We had the Anglo-Zulu wars because the South Africans were trying to protect those areas. Though they didn't know the products from these minerals, but they were fighting to protect their areas. So with the discovery of minerals in South Africa, European powers thought that maybe the entire Africa is covered up with such minerals. We have the growth of nationalism in Europe also created the need to for internal recognition or international recognition and prestige. So many of the European powers were fighting, we are looking for territories just for prestige, just for respect. Because if you there is a man in America called Downs. Downs gave a theory that this theory was pushing many of the European countries to struggle for African territories. He said that any country that does not expand will die. So this was an imperialistic theory that imparted the spirit of imperialism in many of the European countries, and now they were eager to expand. They were eager to be recognized. So this theory pushed them to rush for African colonies just for prestige and respect. We have power imbalance in Europe also created the need for colonies in East Africa. In 1870 to 1871, France, with the struggle with Prussia, that is under Napoleon III and the Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck, the German Chancellor, confronted with France in the Franco-Prussian War, and at the end of this war, France lost her two important territories, that is Alsace and Lorraine. But taking you back, Alsace and Lorraine were formerly territories that belonged to Germans. But in the struggle that German or Prussia had during the reign of King Louis XIV of France, France ended up grabbing these two territories and took them. So when Bismarck, after years and years and years, Bismarck was so strategic, diplomatic, so he used the logic of calling France to help her in the 1866 Austro-Prussian War, and he promised him the southern parts of Germany. But yet Bismarck was using this as a technique of restoring the former territories that belonged to their country. So France, after losing Alsace and Lorraine, had to look for areas of compensation, and there was nothing else apart from even coming to East Africa. So France came to East Africa to compensate herself after the loss of Alsace and Lorraine. Another one, we have the Berlin Conference of 1885. This also increased the pressure in the struggle for African territories. It gave them a platform that they used to divide African territories. The Berlin Congress gave the European powers. They go ahead to come and they fight for African territories and divide them, but there were some terms and conditions reached by different European powers. And one of them was that whenever you colonize the African territories, ensure that there is in civilization, you establish for them roads and you provide them with education. That is why many of them came. That's why we shall see that the need to civilize African powers also made them to come. So European powers had the desire to stamp out slave trade and slavery, which had caused the trouble for Africans. And remember, this is the time when missionaries were coming to Africa. So they were targeting those areas with bigger population. So they could not do their work when slave trade was also taking place. So the need to stop slave trade made them to rush. So these are some of the social factors. If you hear such points, they are social factors. We have European powers wanted to spread Christianity because they did not want to see Africans go to hell. That's what they said. So they thought that Africans they didn't know about God. So what came into their mind that let us go and spread Christianity to save Africans from going to hell. But to Africans knew God, if you look at African traditional religion. But for them, they thought that Africans didn't know about God, so they were eager to come in Africa to spread Christianity to ensure that Africans are safe. Lastly, European powers also wanted to civilize Africans who were considered backward in terms of education, in terms of dressing, in everything. So they were taken, they took Africans to be barbaric because of the cultural practices that they were doing. For example, killing of twins. And this made them to come in Africa to educate them, teaching them, showing them that even twins are children. They have to be kept alive, and even giving them what we call Western education to solve the problem of language barrier, so that Africans they can learn how to read and write. So I beg to submit those are some of the factors that pushed many of the European countries to come and struggle for African territory.